Hey folks, Steve here with a hopefully short but specific World in Flames video for you today. When it comes to creating content, I guess what's on the mind most is what gets recorded. And I find myself thinking about World in Flames a lot just because I am, as I've said before in other videos, I'm in a regular World in Flames group. We play maybe once or twice a month. And I've found over the years of learning with and playing with, I'm actually quite bad at it. Now, some of that, there are real reasons for that. Some of it is if you only play once or twice a month, and your whole life is crazy in between those times, and the person who's hosting the game, you're not over there every day or anything, you're only there for the whiff game, you kind of forget what's going on in the game, you forget your plans, you look at your notes thinking, okay, what was I talking about? And that leaves some pretty disjointed play on my part, and that's a personal problem, that's just something I need to get better at. But, part of the other challenge with World in Flames is that there's so much that you don't know even after playing a number of times, because you play different powers, right? Like, I learned a lot the last time I played Japan. I've learned a lot playing the Commonwealth, which is who I'm playing in the current game. And you start to pick up on things, or you start to learn things that you would not have otherwise paid attention to unless you were really learning the tricks of the trade and focused on these hyper, minutia bits and pieces of the game that I think it's very easy. You could be playing World in Flames and never think about these things and always do very poorly, and it might be game-changing to understand not just the rules and the concepts, but to look beyond just what the rule book says and looking at all the pieces in aggregate together and truly understand good play versus bad play, because the rule book won't tell you that, right? Now, the campaign book has a lot of great player notes that I highly recommend reading if you're looking to play World in Flames. Absolutely read all the player notes. In fact, I would go far as to say, read every player note section for every campaign scenario, even if you're not going to play the smaller scenarios, because there is practical advice, tactical advice, strategic advice, even for the smaller scenarios that you could apply or wrap up into other strategic elements in a game that you're playing. Like, here's strategy for Barbarossa. Well, you could still use those tactical considerations in a global game in addition to all the player notes that are for the global war game. And I think that helps a lot. And then I think there are things that those player notes don't cover, things that you could not put together unless you were really playing a game and really figuring out unless you're really playing through a game, like moving the counters around and doing the whole thing, right? And what I find it funny is okay, if I'm playing at my buddies and we go and we play, I try to play quickly, right, so we get through the game, or else it'll take forever. And then I don't, because it's your opponent's pieces on the board, you're not moving around your opponent's pieces to experiment. You don't get to experiment a whole lot in an actual opposed game. And so it's very difficult to be well, what if I tried doing this? What works out here? And setting the game up at home is a nightmare because of the space taken and the digging through all the counters. And so 100%, I think the vassal module comes in super handy. Sorry, I'm slightly distracted by a message on a whole different thing. Anyway, so the vassal module is super convenient. Now, I'm using the official one, which as of, I guess this must be the latest version, is 1.06.p. Now I have access to this because I had like pre-ordered the collector's edition the day it went live for pre-orders, and I got the maximum package, and like it came with the vassal module. You can purchase the official module for some amount of money that I can't recall. I would say it's probably worth it, but that's the thing. It's like you're paying for a vassal module, and most or many vassal modules are free. I think in this case it's certainly worth it. Now, some folks have created some free non-official vassal modules for collector's edition. I've not used them. I can't speak to it. I'm just going to use what I have available that I know I can use. It's the official one. I already have access to it. Real easy for me to use. But either way, terribly convenient tool, right? Because what's in here, you have the counter sheets. You get access to all the different counters. A bunch of drop downs. You really don't want to do that. What you want to do is you can load some predefined setups, and what that will do for you is it will begin to populate you can click the different major powers, and you'll get a sub menu here. You can look at the force pool, which right now for Germany is empty, or you can look at the kit inventories, and this is where the actual counters are organized by, here's the, I'm going to move this, classic game counters, here's the deluxe game counters, divisions in flames, territories in flames, planes in flames, ships in flames, whatever deluxe expansion you want to use, whatever rules you're using to play the game, it's all in here there for you. And the reason why they're not already sorted into force pools is that based on what scenario you're playing, it may call for different things to be in your force pool than not. And you can see up here the scenario that I pulled up was the Fascist Tide, War in Europe, or Mare Nostrum setup, which is really just like a Europe-only thing. So if I scroll over, like there is no Pacific map over here, this is just looking at the European map. And so what that really means from the setup is like if you look at the Japanese kit inventories, it's empty. They didn't even bother to load up the Japanese counters because they're really not going to be relevant. Technically, if you're playing Fascist Tide, there is a need to pull some Japanese counters out of the counter mix for some special off-map stuff, but not a big deal. But the powers that will exist in this Eastern Theater of Operations will have their kit inventories present. Like here is Italy, Germany. You can imagine France is going to be in here. Britain. China will not, right? No China. So on and so forth. And there's a ton of great stuff in here. There's the counters for the miners. You've got a thing to set up for air combat. If you want it to be a little organized, you can do it that way. There's ways to set the weather. So storm, you get sort of this effect over the terrain, which might make it look really busy, but it's still there. The charts are all in here. Some game function counters available. You can clone them, you can drag them around, you can do all sorts of stuff with that. And then they've got the actual charts and tables, all kinds of fun stuff in here. You can even look at game reports, which I think is really interesting. Like you can say like the game has 41 objectives on this map. You can say who controls Belgrade, and you can select the major power that controls Belgrade. Not that I don't think you necessarily need to do that, but if you want to do that, you certainly can. So a lot of cool stuff in here, and I guess the point of this video, which I'm taking a long time getting to, 10 minutes, I guess everything else I said is of some value, but the main thing is like if you've never played before and you're playing for the first time, there are so many things that like don't even occur to you to be prepared for. Now, if you might be a very astute person and you might just apply other board game experiences to it and all of that, but like if I zoom into Russia for a second, like okay, well did you know that if you wanted to, you could set up your units as Russia preparing for an invasion of Barbarossa. You could set up your units several hexes back away from the front line with the Germans, far enough back that maybe you're setting up on these river lines here, right, There's a break here. That's sort of a weak point. But then the rivers meet back up over here, and you've got a nice line over the Dnieper River. You could go ahead and set units back up here, and when Germany invades Russia with the surprise impulse, if you're far enough away, they might not be able to do, a bunch of big attacks on that first surprise impulse if where your line is enough movement points behind the border that they can't get all of their forces up against you to launch attacks the whole way across your line. It's weird stuff like that can get you. And the topic of today's video is around the Mediterranean. And I'm going to use strategic bombers from the Commonwealth Force Pool as our sort of illustrative example. But stuff that I think, like, as a new player, right, if you're absolutely new and you're playing the Commonwealth, which, gosh, if you're absolutely new playing the Commonwealth, that's a tall order. And I think even if you're, like, you've played other powers but you're playing the Commonwealth for the first time, there's a lot that could go wrong, right? I'll freely admit I've lost Egypt in my current game because I'm just bad. I made some poor, risky decisions that were foolish, and they bit me in the butt pretty bad. But I think anybody who's familiar with World War II is going to recognize a couple of things with the Commonwealth. They've got Gibraltar in the west, sort of containing the Western Mediterranean Sea Zone. They've got Malta, which does not reach into the Italian coast sea zone, but is nearby, and we'll talk about the usefulness of that in a minute. And then, at least at the beginning of the game, and really probably for the entire game, they should control Egypt, at the very least. They hope to control Egypt and retain control of it, very important, for many reasons that we won't discuss here. They're also going to have Cyprus. And then, depending on what happens with Greece, they may control some of these islands for some period of time. When Greece gets invaded by the Axis. Whenever that is, if they do it, which, there's plenty of reasons to do it. So let's kind of talk through, obviously, controlling these 3 points. Egypt, Malta, Gibraltar are important for having presence in the Mediterranean and exerting control in the Mediterranean, right? Obvious stuff. It's World War II 101, obviously. But I think what can get lost for folks who are just learning the game is when they're building stuff. Now, I've put a bunch of stuff in the scrap pool because I was trying to I don't even know where the scrap pool is in this vassal module, but I have scrapped, hey, there it is. I've scrapped a whole bunch of stuff. These are planes that did not match what I wanted to illustrate today. But just to kind of show for a second, right, here's a bunch of stuff I scrapped. Now, if you look at some of these counters that are on screen, you're going to see there's different ranges, right? 5, 3, 3, 8, 8, 9. I think at a beginner level, right, if you're absolutely new to the game, you're just trying to understand the systems, there's going to be some obvious things that you'll notice, right? Like planes, even within the same type of plane, will have different ranges. Now, you can say, okay, well clearly, this is a better plane because it's got a greater range than the other one. I think what can sometimes be lost in the middle of a game because you don't have the opportunity to like play around a whole lot unless you're the host or you're just sitting here with the map and you're figuring this stuff out. Like the range is not just, hey, it's better, it can go farther, and maybe it can be based further behind a front line or something, but so much of this game, and I think this is where like expertise in the game starts to develop, is like you know exactly how far a hex is from another hex of importance. You know exactly how far, and that means you know exactly what kind of plane you're going to need to do a thing that you want to do. And if you're just flying by the seat of your pants and you're just like, oh, I have a plane with an 8 range and I'm going to try to throw them down here in Gibraltar. Well, what are you going to do with that plane with 8 range in Gibraltar? What is the purpose of that plane? What is it going to be doing for you? And this started to crop up in my mind because I started thinking about like the historical campaign for Crete. What good is Crete in the big scheme of things? Why worry about or spend a huge amount of time thinking about Crete, maybe as the axis? And it starts to come together when you start thinking through the need for air basing in any given location and what that is even going to do for you. Now, there's a lot of different ways I could illustrate this example. This would be a really long, an even longer video if I spent too much time talking about every case. But think about for a second the C box system, right? If you want to think about it in terms of naval bombers, right? I could open up this. I could grab one of these guys. Let's say here. Say we've got this naval bomber, the Wildebeest, with a 9 range. What is that going to do for us in game? If this guy's based in near Cornwall out here, you say, and it wants to fly into the Bay of Biscay and maybe do some protection, you could fly it, go right to the 0 box, provide some level of escort for convoys. That's one use. You could send it out and go, okay, 1 range, that to get into a hex dot, then it's down to 8 range remaining, and then you could get it to the 3 box because it's 1 plus 2 plus 3 is 6 altogether. You wouldn't have enough to get to the 4 box, but then this guy could hang out in the 3 box. And that's okay, right? That's useful. If you said, okay, well, what happens if I move this guy? And this is not, I should say, not the best naval bomber, right? This is probably an early, 1933. You're not going to hold on to this guy very long. If he's based out of Gibraltar, and if you look at the stacking, right, a major port provides 3 stacking. So ordinarily a mountain is 0, but a major port allows you to stack up to 3. You could have this plane and maybe a couple of, 2 others, right? And if you're not counting carriers, right, we're just going to talk about air power in this video, not carriers, and you wanted to send them out to sea, well, he could go over here, out to the 0 or the 3 box. He could go out to here, to the 0 or the 3 box. But the Commonwealth is constrained because they very likely do not control Morocco, because it's probably Vichy. Algeria is probably Vichy. Tunisia is probably Vichy. You're not going to control Spain, and you're not going to control Portugal unless, like, you invade Portugal, which in some circumstances that might be a good idea. But you basically have room for 3 planes down here, and if you and ideally you do want to have some carriers, so you have some additional air presence in this area. You might need one of those 3 aircraft basing to be a fighter to escort these naval bombers or to do something, and then you need some bombers to actually do stuff. So there's a limited amount of options. Malta, similarly, is it's a clear hex, but most importantly it's a major port, so you could likewise, again, have room for 3 planes. From there, your presence in the east comes to Egypt, and if you're trying to put things into the Eastern Med box from a naval bomber standpoint, then again, let's say we move this guy over to Malta. This guy could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and could get to the 2 box, which, from Malta, which is okay, right? I mean, if you have a chance to interdict some Italian shipping, that might be worth it. But again, likewise, you could go to the Eastern Med, but because you have more naval bomber basing potential all along the coast here in Egypt, or in Alexandria and this whole area, you can certainly project a lot of naval bombers into the Eastern Med here if you wanted to. No big deal, right? So for naval bombers, it's just having the air stacking to project force, right? So your naval air that's stationed in Gibraltar, you could send to Cape St. Vincent, you could send it to the Western Med. The stuff you have in Malta could go either or even play around in the Italian coast, depending on the range. If you get some higher range naval bombers, maybe range 11 or 12, then going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you could get up to the 3 box and be scary or an issue. If you lose Malta, which I would not recommend losing Malta, but sometimes it happens, then all of a sudden you can't even touch any of this. Again, unless you're, maybe it's 42 or 43 and you're in Tunisia invading into Sicily, then you have probably air based out of Tunis. But in the early game, you're going to miss out on your switch hitter and then Italian coast stuff. Now, obviously, if you lose Egypt, if you lose Gibraltar, then you're going to really lose all ability to project force into these sea areas, right? You're just going to start to lose it. One aspect that I was thinking through is like, well, why was Crete important? Well, historically, the Axis did have concerns of land-based bombers operating out of Crete. You say, well, Crete's pretty far away, so why would it be important? Like, what good would it even be? Well, let's say that the Axis have declared on Greece. If you can keep, as the Commonwealth, if you can keep Greece from falling in that first impulse, there are ways you could try to do that, right? Situate the units a certain way, whatever. Maybe get lucky on some die rolls. If you can keep, this from being taken in one impulse and then the turn ends, right? You get at least some turns before it's conquered. You could then, as the Commonwealth, move some units from Egypt or wherever into Crete or even some of these islands. Now, I don't ultimately know like how well an island strategy would work. I think the big thing is like islands can be traversed with Marines, so Marine unit could be moving all around through here. But if you look at Crete and where it's situated, it is potentially in range of strategically bombing Taranto. And that's kind of the key thing about why you might care about Crete and what to do with the units that you get when you start building land bombers as the Commonwealth, or why even build land bombers. So I picked a selection of strategic bombers in the Commonwealth force pool. These are all 5 build cost, 3 turn, and some 4 turn, right? There are some 4 turn ones here. Or I guess it's half and half almost. Or it is half and half, geez, okay. Some are 4 turn, some are 3 turn, right? Some are more expensive, some are cheaper. Some of these are in the force pool at the beginning of a 39 game. Some of these start coming in 1940, 41, and I included some 42 ones just as a case of example. But this whole topic, I'm thinking like the usability here is going to be relatively early war, 1940, 41, where the Commonwealth is hanging on, and they're trying to combat the Axis with limited resources, waiting for the United States to join the war, right? So these planes being in their force pool in 40, 41, and these ones being 42 if the situation requires it, you have what I would say are 8 decent 4-turn bombers. And how this starts to play in is actually calculating from a given hex to a target hex. How far do you need to be? Now, if you start building, your strat bombers and you don't pull these, it means you can't do what I'm going to describe. But I think where that expertise starts to kick in is say, hey, I picked some Wellington planes. When I went to build my strat bombers, I got some Wellingtons, I got some Lancasters, I got a Sterling. That is going to let me do this that maybe I didn't think I could do before. If I control Crete, specifically Heraklion, and I'm going to zoom in case you can't tell because it's almost missable. This hex right here, 2210, is actually clear terrain. So what that means is you have a minor port in Heraklion, you have a fine or clear hex right here, and assuming as the Commonwealth you've moved British units, land units into here to hold Crete, throw a couple divisions here or something just to control the hex. even when Greece is conquered, you're going to retain control of these couple of hexes. Again, if you go for islands, the same thing would potentially apply. And assuming you still can retain supply here, right? You've got a strong protected supply line in the Med, you will have air basing. So in total for Crete, just look at the stacking chart up here. Any other hex is 1 stack. Minor port is 2. If you're willing to throw in some engineers or HQ, you could increase that. I'm going to leave that out just for simplicity right now. So if you control these 2 hexes as the Commonwealth, then we got a supply line, right? That's always going to be a concern with Axis subs and the Italian Navy and all that crazy stuff. You have the ability to stack 3 planes in Crete. Now they could be some of these bombers. And this is why, like you say, well, you've got plenty of air basing in Egypt. Well, the reality is you're not going to hit Italy from Egypt with anything, right? It's too far away. You can send nav bombers into the Med, right? That's fine. That you'll be able to operate in the Med just fine with that basing. You're not going to reach the Italian coast from Egypt. You might be able to reach it from Malta. Malta can stack plenty of stuff, right? You could decide, hey, I'm going to use Malta as a strat bomb base. You could certainly do that. But you probably also need it for nav basing. So my thinking is, you know, if you're trying to level out your aircraft basing, like you probably want some nav fighter in Gibraltar. You probably want some nav and fighters in Malta. And you probably have some nav or fighters potentially in Egypt, all covering the sea zones. But this extra location, like Crete, can be used for other purposes, where you start getting these strat bombers. So let's say it's still really early game. Say we've got this guy. Let's say we've done a heavy strat bomb, and it's 1940, right? So we have a 38, 39, and a 40 strat bombing set up here. I'll put these guys down here for a moment. Okay, so both of these guys right here, they're situated, all 3. I'll just move this guy here for point of example. What's really important is that they have a 7 range and that they can do extended range missions. You can't really do it any other way. You need the extended range. When you fly an extended range mission, they're going to have their strat bomb factors halved. So it's still not as good as like you're in their backyard and you're hitting them, right? And even from Malta, if you count the hex to try to get to a factory space of Italy, you're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, that's in range for regular, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This might be in range, Naples might be in range for some of your planes with an 8 normal range. But from here, what you're really looking at is, if we double that to 14, how far can we go? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Just enough from this fine weather hex. And you can maybe count a couple different ways, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Yeah. 13 hexes. This guy can strat bomb Taranto with a 2 factor, right? Maybe not the best. Then this guy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. This guy can come in with 2, 3.5, half to 1.5, rounds up to 2. That's 2 more, so you got 4. And then if you've got this Sterling there too, and realizing like, yeah, this is an investment, right? This is a huge investment of effort. Then you have the Sterling, which is going to halve down to a 4. Again, from this hex here, it can get there. And if you look at the charts for air combat, you say, what's that total, right? And strategic bombardment, assuming all these guys get through, which they may not, so factor that in, you could be talking up to, 2, 4, 8 strategic bombardment factors altogether. There's a 50% chance that you are going to cause some production loss if you rolled higher than just a 5, or I guess that's actually a 60% chance. My bad. 60% chance of doing some production loss. And then if you just keep, if you roll a little bit higher, now you're talking like 3 production points or oil lost, and that is crazy good, right? Like 3 on Italy. Italy doesn't make that much in the early game to begin with, right? That can add up over time. You can also get really crazy, and maybe if you're really pushing it, maybe you have an HQ out here and you do an air action and you reorganize them and you do it again and you try to bomb them some more. Or maybe what you do is you have 3 here and then you've got, let's say, a later game one, like this 41 bomber who's set up in Malta, and this guy can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Normal range hit Naples. So these guys all hit Taranto, this guy hits Naples, and you potentially are doing 6 production points losses on the Italians in a given turn if you dedicate your air stacking to strat bombing and you've gone heavy on strat bombing. And in the early game, maybe you don't have the time for that. You probably have other priorities, but if all of a sudden Italy can't build anything, or they're having a hard time building much at all, and you're hitting them that bad, that can have a very strong influence on the game over time. The other way that this can become important is if you're trying to hit Germany in the form of their oil resources in Romania. And this was, I think, the actual historical concern of the Axis powers with Crete at the time, because, again, let's do some counting and figure out, what and where we can hit. So if we count from here, in Heraklion, or two count, go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 hits Bucharest, right? So you could get, it's not a whole lot, right? You could get 6 in here and, you start hitting Germany. If instead you had swapped out, or whatever the case is, that one of these gets shot down, you replace it with an 8 range and you do extended, going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, da, 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 you can actually hit the plus D oil fields. And again, when we look at the charts, whoops, wrong chart. Let's say we're even just getting, a 4 to 6 or something. You have a pretty good chance of, it says, number of production points and or oil lost this turn. Well, if you hit this hex, the only thing there is oil. Now, okay, it is a forested hex, so you have to have, again, so in actuality, you're probably having to roll pretty good. But you get enough planes here, and, Greece is no longer neutral, right? They've been invaded, and the Allies are there trying to support Greece, and they've got Crete as an air base. They can start to target the oil. Now, one thing we haven't factored into this conversation is air defense, cap, interception of the Axis. So, yeah, the Axis, if all of a sudden they see that you're basing a ton of strat bombers on Crete, yeah, they're probably going to keep some fighters back here, right? So instead of maybe, fighting and contending the sea zones and escorting naval bombers, which the Italians have pretty good naval bombers, well, now they're stuck having to keep some fighters near Naples and Taranto so that they don't get strat bombed. And that means those fighters can't escort those nav bombers, and so that shifts the weight a little bit. Same thing, needing to keep fighters back near Bucharest. And this is especially important probably when Barbarossa is underway, because the Germans are going to want every air unit in the east that they can afford. But if you're already pinging them back here, then they're going to have a harder time. If you have, lower range strat bombers and you've kept them in the home islands, you know, that you can still hit a lot of Axis targets here for strat bombing. But maybe by that point, the American strat bombers have started to come into basing in the UK, and then the Americans can do strat bombing of Germany up here, and you still have a strong UK bomber command, you know, helping to whittle down Italy or knocking out some of their oil resources. But again, like, this is something that I think until I sat down and started figuring this out, like, I would not have even realized that this was an option. But that in order for this to work, you really do need very particular units, right? You're not going to do it with a lot of these other, like, you know, this Mosquito, it's not going to cut it. Now, he's not really a strat bomber, but I think I've got some other examples in here of some planes where it's like, yeah, you wouldn't, like this guy. If you drew this guy, you say, wow, he is a great 40 strat bomber with 6 range. I should use him. Well, if you're going to, keep in mind that if you base him in Crete, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, not enough. It's not enough to get up here, even with extended range. If you've got him in Malta, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you're left having to use extended range, which, I mean, 3 is still not bad. Don't get me wrong. You know, if that's all you pulled out of production and that's your only option, then there you go. But you stick him in Malta and he can at least hit something, and that's better than nothing, I guess, right? But it's stuff like this, I think, that goes totally over a newbie's head, because they, you know, well, you wouldn't even be thinking about that probably, right? You'd be looking at Crete going, I can't spare the forces. You know, Greece is going to get swamped and crushed by the Axis, and you're more worried about Egypt and everything else. But you know, these islands are useful. The one thing I'll say is I don't know that Cyprus is as useful. And I try to think about, like, what Cyprus is good for the resource, sure. And you can certainly get a lot more basing here, right? You can stick a plane here, you can stick a plane here, you can stick 2 here, and 1 here, right? But you cannot fly missions over a neutral country, so assuming Turkey is neutral, which it will be, you know, most of the time unless things have gotten really bad for the Soviet Union, these guys could not fly through to get to Bucharest and the oil fields up here, unless, again, Turkey's been involved in the war, so you could maybe hit these places with the right range, but you've just got this big blocker. Maybe if you have to bomb Vichy or Axis forces in Syria, then Cyprus helps, and then potentially if you needed to bomb the oil fields in Iraq because somehow the Axis has taken control, you know, you're probably more likely able to do that from Palestine or Jordan or something, but Cyprus, I guess, is an option. I just don't see the importance of Cyprus for air basing, besides the fact that it's just got that resource there that, you know, the Allies probably want to retain, or at least keep out of the Axis's hand. Now, this whole thing that I just talked about, where, like, every hex matters, every bit of range matters, is applicable all over the map, right? Like, you know, pick any single place. What do you need to do to hit Berlin from the closest, you know, Commonwealth hex, right? If it's Harwich, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you either need an extended range 5 range plane, or you need a 10 range plane, right? If you want to hit Berlin. But you don't have to hit Berlin. You might want to hit the Rhineland instead, that kind of thing. But the German player's probably going to be setting up fighter screens and flak and all that kind of stuff. So it starts to become more important over time. In areas like the East Front, you know, maybe doesn't matter as much, but I find anything related to these wide open spaces where it is difficult to project power, all of a sudden those ranges are huge. That 8 range compared to 7, or 7 compared to 6, is so huge when you think about it in those terms. If you were just looking at it as a comparative 6 versus 7, say, it's not that much better, and gosh, the 3 strat bomb value is worse than the 6. But this guy can hit Taranto from Crete, and this guy can't. And it's that strategic level difference and unit quality that can be huge. Now, I'm going to close this for a second. Wait a minute. Well, okay. This video is getting really long. I didn't want this to be a hugely long and difficult video to get through. Maybe I can do another video for this another day, but if you imagine this example, right, Crete to Taranto, a relatively straightforward, count, no matter which way you go at it, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, 12, 13. I think no matter what route you take, it's going to be 13 hexes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Yeah. Imagine this for the Pacific. Now, I know if there are whiff experts, you're probably nodding your head, and this is old hat to you. This becomes important in the Pacific as well, and it's maybe even more important when you start thinking about the land-based air cover needed to support invasions, and all of that. And I did a video a long time ago talking about an island hopping campaign, which is a very bad video. I would not recommend watching it at this point, because I don't think it's a very good video. Maybe I need to do a redo of that video, but these ranges become very important there as well for that reason. So this Crete to Taranto example, simple. When we start talking about the Pacific, it gets a lot more complicated. There's a lot more there, and you have a lot more of these cases in like we have in the Mediterranean, where your basing may be very far away from your next basing opportunity, and you're really thinking about what's going to go where, what are my stacking limits, and what are my ranges? Am I using my stacking most efficiently for the range of my planes to do the thing that I need to do? And when you figure in a standard game, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if you look at how many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, like Italy has 10 factories, right? And unless they start making a lot of headway in other places, they're going to stay having 10 factories, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 10. Well, if you're doing, okay, it's actually 11. My bad. I forgot about Trieste. 11 factories, and you start doing that stuff where you're knocking down, 2 to 3 production points. Maybe Germany's lending Italy some production points, but you're effectively taking like 20 to 30% sometimes of their production away, and that can mean that's one less infantry that Italy is building that turn. And if you can keep that going turn after turn, then for 6 turns, that's 6 units that Italy never built, or 6 or several, or a nav bomber that they're not building, or a fighter, or a new sub, or whatever. And that over time can be hugely important, especially if you can even lean in and start doing even more and hit 2 factory hexes, and then you're doing like half their production is going up in smoke. And if you're able to sustain that in the early game, 1940, 41, I think that could be huge impact to your survivability in the Mediterranean, allowing the Commonwealth to retain power in the Mediterranean through the early to mid game, and then the United States joins up, and then you can kind of hit them from multiple angles. Now, for me right now, this whole discussion is terribly irrelevant because I have no power in the Mediterranean in my current game. Sucks to say, but it's true. But something for the future And the way I see it, pretty much every game of World in Flames is a learning game, because you're going to learn more and more about the game each time you play, across the years of playing that even I have under my belt at this point. Compared to the experts who've had years and years, it's not much, but you start to learn these little tricks, these little things that could be very easy to miss if you weren't paying attention to these specific types of things. So, hope that was interesting. If there are newbies watching this, I hope this is of some value. If there are experts watching this and I've gotten something very wrong, let me know. If there is something you want to add to this, or saying, yeah, Steve, you got it, but here's some other things you should know or think about, please share in the comment section down below. I would appreciate that. I'm sure the other newbies to the World in Flames game would appreciate your insights. And I'll leave it there for now, guys. Appreciate it if you're watching. We'll do more videos to come on other games and topics, and I'm always happy to talk about World in Flames when the time is right. So I think that's it, guys. Take care. Keep on gaming.